Hey guys, what's up? It's Chris here. In this video, I want to show you how to put together an app design like this. And this is something that I put together for a Webflow video that I did last week. And by no means is this a super spectacular app design, but I thought it would be super helpful just to show you guys how I was able to build this app design inside of Figma. For those of you guys who are not familiar with the graphic software that you use for app development, two of the most common ones that people use are Figma and Sketch. Now they're very similar, but Figma happens to be very free. And so I tend to use that a lot more because I know that it's a lot more accessible for people to use. Now, the nice thing about Figma as well is that it's browser based so that you can use it if you're on the PC or if you're on Mac and you don't need to install any sort of software. There is a standalone Figma app if you want to use that as a standalone desktop app, but I typically use it in the browser a lot. And as you can see here, because it is so free, I use it a lot. And it's such a great tool for being absolutely free. The only time you have to pay is if you want to collaborate as a team. So if you're actually working in a team environment, maybe for your job or maybe for an app you're building for a client or something like that, then you might want to pay to have those collaboration features. But as a solo indie developer using Figma solo, pretty much it's a free tool. So I'm going to show you how I was able to put together this app design. There are some techniques here for those of you who haven't really used Figma that I think are interesting for you to learn and would be very beneficial and helpful for you. For those of you guys who are very familiar with Figma and graphic software in general, then you might not learn anything new here. Furthermore, I'm not going to go over the very basics of Figma, like where things are and shapes and stuff like that. So if you want that, because I'm not sure how many of you guys know how to use graphic software like Figma and Sketch already, and how many of you guys don't. So if many of you aren't familiar with Figma and Sketch and you want to learn the basics, then just leave a comment below and I'll gauge how many of you there are. If there are more than 10 of you, then I would be happy to create a basics tutorial about Figma. But for now, I'm just gonna jump right into it and recreate this app design for you so you can learn some of these techniques. So what we're going to do is jump over to my Figma dashboard here, and we're going to create a brand new file. As you can see, I actually use it quite a bit, and you can have multiple projects that you collaborate with different people and so on. But we're going to start a new file here. And again, this is right in my browser, so it's crazy how much you can do in your browser. One of the things that I like about Figma is they have a whole bunch of preset sizes. If you just hit A on your keyboard, you can see and you can just select a size. I'm going to go with this iPhone 11. That's the smaller size right here. And so you can see it creates a canvas. On my left here, you're going to see all the layers and shapes that I add. On the right hand side here, these are going to be configuring things like borders and positions and colors and gradients and stuff like that for the individual elements that I select. So let's go ahead and put some elements on the screen so you can see what I'm talking about. There's a ribbon at the top with all of your tools. And so let's add a shape. So we're going to go with ellipse. And as you use this more, just take note of these shortcut keys because it'll really save you a lot of time as you move on. I'm going to try not to use too many keys here because for the benefit of you following visually. So you can draw a circle or ellipse like that. If you hold down shift, it's going to be a perfect circle. So we're going to hold down shift and we're going to add a circle, something like that, to position there. Let's make it a little bigger. Actually, let's hold down shift and actually, I think I messed up those proportions. All right, hold down shift and let's grow it a little bit. And then we're going to set the fill. Now the fill is just a fancy name for the color that's inside. So we're going to click open the solid color. And instead of choosing a solid, we're going to hit this drop down and choose linear for a linear gradient. You can change the direction of the gradient by just positioning these handles here. And by default, it starts with a solid color on the right and sort of a invisible color or a color that's kind of near invisible on the right hand side. So if you wanted two solid colors, you can just move this. This controls the alpha or the opacity of the color. So dragging it all the way to 0 just kind of makes that color invisible. So I'm going to go from a blue, something like that, that's fine, to a kind of like more slight blue. Maybe I'll just go even more fine like that. And so that's my gradients. Oh yeah, one quick thing. Today's video is sponsored by Atlantic.net. Atlantic.net provides great VPS hosting, and they are offering a free 1 gig virtual server with SSDs, free block storage, and free snapshots for an entire year. In addition to that, get $25 in free credits to use on any other services they offer. Try Atlantic.net to develop, test, or launch your next project. Ease of use is something that I like as it frees up my mind to focus on coding. I also like that they have round-the-clock phone support, so if I happen to get stuck, I can contact them easily. So visit atlantic.net/CodeWithChris and enter the code CHRIS to get your $25 free credit. These guys are great, give them a try, and don't forget to use the coupon code CHRIS to get $25 in free credit. That's an exclusive offer just for you guys. So let's go ahead and close that menu. Now let's add some text. So there's another key. T is for text, so you can either press this button here or you can hit T on your keyboard. So I'm going to go ahead and type some text. And as you can see, I've added two elements to the screen, this shape and this text, and you can see that both of them are here. So I'm going to change the attributes of this text. You can add your own fonts by installing a font helper utility. Just Google Figma font helper and you'll see it if you want to use the fonts that are on your own computer. They do have a whole bunch of fonts you can use already. So I'm just going to change this font to SF Pro Display. And I'm going to change this to bold instead of regular, and I'll change the font size to 24. So it's going to go there, and then you can just drag it and position it. Now, if you want to get really accurate with your measurements, you can hold down Alt on your keyboard. And so let's select the text first, and then hold down Alt, and then you can hover your mouse around different elements, and you can see the margins and the relation of that text element to other elements. Because now my mouse is over the frame, I can see how far my label is away from the top edge, the left edge. But if I hovered over the circle, then I would get measurements relative to the circle. But I actually want to position the margin, so I'm going to make it relative to the frame. And then by tapping the arrow keys on my keyboard, I can kind of position it. I can make sure that it's 20 from the left if I want to be very accurate and line things up. All right, so the next thing we have is this sort of text here, and then we have a sort of progress bar. So let's add another piece of text. I'm going to hit T this time because you have already seen me choose that. So I'm going to say you are 23 hours away from the reward. And this one we're going to set to back to regular, and I believe we were using, might have been 14. Yeah. Okay, so now because this top label is already in place, I can drag it and kind of see, position it like that. But there are also some keys up here to kind of align the different edges. So for example, if I want to align these two text elements on the left edge, I can hold down Shift and select both of them and then hit this, and it's gonna make sure that they're aligned on the left. And then you can choose center or right align or top and align those different things. All right, so now let's go ahead and build this progress bar, which is basically just two overlapping rectangles. So let's choose rectangle and let's do something like that. It doesn't matter exactly what height. I'm not gonna try to be exact here, but you can adjust the width and the height right here. So that's our progress bar, but it doesn't have any rounded corners. So you'll see that a lot of elements actually have this here. This is a corner radius. So this dictates, you could either enter a number or you could put your mouse over this and you can drag. And this indicates, how rounded the corners are. So let's go ahead and just set it to 10. Right, and this is actually degrees. So if you wanted to rotate something, you can go ahead and do that. So I'm going to undo it. All right, so now we've got this sort of gray progress bar, which is going to represent the track. Now, sometimes I like to zoom in, and a shortcut key to zoom in is if you hold down Command, and this might be the Windows key for you if you're on PC, and just scroll your wheel. And then you can zoom in and zoom out. And then when you're zoomed in, sometimes if you want to move quickly to the other side, rather than dragging these bars here, you can hold down spacebar, and your cursor will change to a hand, and then you can just kind of pan around like that. So I'm going to scroll out a little bit. Those two shortcuts will be really handy for you to navigate around the screen. I want to position this in the middle, so you can kind of just drag and wait for these red lines to show up. And that's how I know this guy is in the center here. Now, in order to create the track, it's basically the same rectangle on top, but with less width, and then a gradient. So I'm going to go ahead and take this element, and I'm going to press Command C and Command V just to create a second one. So you can see this is my first one, this is my second one. For the second one, I'm going to change the width to something like 250. So it's still hard to see right now, but let me just change the color there. Then you can see it's like that. And just like before, we're going to change it from solid to a gradient. But this time we're going to do that. Do that, and we're gonna go from, let's say this blue, or let's say a green, and then the second color here, we're gonna make it a blue like that. But I don't want it to be an invisible color, so I'm actually going to drag it to 100% opacity, and so you see something like that. As for the icon right here, I didn't create this icon from scratch. Instead, I used a service called icons8.com, where you can grab a whole bunch of icons for your use. So this is what it is right here. This is icons 8, and so I think I searched for present or gift or GIF or something like that. And so this is where I get my icons. So you can, when you download it, especially if you're working with Figma or Sketch, you want to download it as an SVG, as a vector file, so that you can scale it down and scale it up without losing any quality. And that's the great thing about working with vectors versus with raster. And if those terms kind of escape you, don't worry about it. Just look for vector. So they also have a desktop app, which I love. So rather than just grabbing something from the website, I have this desktop app right here. So I can choose gift, and there it is. And I can choose what format I want it in. So there's that. And I can simply click and drag it in. Rather than from the website, I would have to download it to my desktop and then drag that file into my browser. So, all right, so I'm going to scale it. When you're scaling it, you can either use these arrows, or you can actually use the scale tool, which is shortcut key K. So when you do that, I would recommend that you do that. You can scale it down. And the way you can tell that you're using the scale tool and not the move tool is if you take a look at my mouse cursor, it just looks like a two-way arrow. But when you press K and you're using the scale, you can see that there's an extra arrow on top of the arrowheads on either side. So let me show you that again. There's V and there's K. You can see that difference. Using the scale tool will give you actually what you want, because sometimes using the move tool and you're trying to scale with it, it doesn't scale everything properly all the time. So there's that little icon there. Let's zoom out a little bit. And so I'm going to just copy this, Command C, Command V, and I've got a second piece of text. And as you can see, you can make sure that it's 20, like you can make sure your measurements are aligned properly. So it's 20 from the left, it's 20 from this progress bar. This guy is 20 from that progress bar. It's also 20 from the left, so of the frame. So you just make sure everything's aesthetically pleasing and lined up properly. And for this design, I used a slightly different color for the text. You could also do that, just change it from black to something else, but I'm not going to bother with that for now. All right, so this part, is kind of the greeting and the stats part. Well, actually this second part is going to be the stats part, but this top part is kind of like a summary, right? So if you wanted to group it together to keep things organized, you could do that rather than having a long list of elements, right? You can go ahead and select all of the elements here. Actually, let's not select the circle because that's part of a background. We're going to put that in a separate group called background. And we're going to press Command G to put it all into a group. I'm so used to using these shortcut keys. I said I wouldn't use many of them, but yeah. So you can even right click and choose group selection. So that's Command G. You can put it all into a group like that, and you can name it. You can name it summary. Right, so now it just keeps things organized, and you can move everything together as a group because they're grouped together. And you can also apply some of these attributes to it as a group. All right, so now we're going to work on the stats here on the bottom. So let me just double check. One other tip is that, sometimes if this is grouped up, so you can see it's grouped up under stats here, it's really hard to select the individual element. But if you hold down command, if you hold down command on your keyboard, you can then actually select an element inside of the group. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. So we're gonna do, I know the reason why I wanted to select it, because I wanted to see what font size I used. Bold 14. These guys are bold 48. So that was 14. And then there was another piece of text down here. This was 48. And let's change the color to something like that. All right. Now, because this text should be centered, you can actually change how it's aligned. So let's choose text center. And I know it visually doesn't make a difference right now, but if you end up typing more text into there, and then sometimes positioning it is also easier if you set it to center, if you're intending that text to be centered. All right, so we can choose these two text elements and we can choose center them just to make sure that they're both kind of aligned in the middles. And then let's go ahead and hit Command D. Before I used Command C with Command V, and that's how you create a second copy, but you can also press Command D to duplicate it. And so you just create a second copy there, press Command D again, and there's another copy. Now the cool thing about Figma is that because I made a duplicate and then I dragged it a little bit to the right, it kind of knows that you're trying to maybe create multiple duplicates. So when you hit Command D again, it automatically places it at the same, it gives the same gap in between these two and these two. And instead of placing it right on top like it did the first time, it put it beside it because it noticed that I did it with this second one. So for the third one, it kind of put it on the side, and that's really, really nice that it noticed that. And then again, I can group these guys up, right, and call this stats. And then now I can move it as, oops, let me just undo. Now I can move it as a group and kind of place it in the middle. And we probably want this group to be 20 from there. Let's see what else we have here. All right, so now we're going to work on this little box here, and you can see it has a slight drop shadow. And these drop shadows are also very easy to do inside of Figma. So we're going to start with a rectangle. The shortcut key is R, in case you didn't notice that. And let's drag a rectangle, something like that. And now here's one thing you can do as well, which makes it very handy. The reason I was fidgeting with this width is because you know how we're using 20 pixel margins between you know, all of the elements on 20 from the left and 20 from the right, in case actually this guy is 23. But if I wanted 20 from the left and 20 from the right, you know, I can make this rectangle the entire width, and then I can go up here and I can say minus 20 and minus 20, and that's gonna essentially minus 40. And then I can position it in the middle. And then now it's perfectly 20 from the left and 20 from the right. So that's a technique that I use sometimes as well. All right, you already know how to do rounded corners, so we can go ahead and do that. Actually, we rounded it 10 before, so we'll stick with 10. And to do a drop shadow, all you have to do is add an effect. So let's go ahead and add a drop shadow like that. We're going to configure the blur and the distance by clicking this little sun icon. So let's just use the measurements I used here because I don't want to fidget with it. There's the rectangle, 20 blur and 10 distance and 15 opacity in terms of the color of the shadow. Now this I actually learned from Mengto, so I have him to thank for this sort of generic set of values. So his rule is whatever distance you put, you blur it double the amount, and the value that he usually uses in terms of the opacity of the shadow is 15. And I agree, it looks really nice. So I've been sticking to that rule myself whenever I do these things. So it's got like this nice slight subtle shadow, which I really like. And I also changed it to white. Now notice that you can also just type in the color code, the hex code, if you know it. So you could do that. All right, so what else do we have here? We have some bold text, 14 size, and then we have these little boxes here. Now these boxes, let's hold down Command so we can drill down. I just want to notice the different 24, 12. I just want to notice these different font sizes. And we've got this dotted line one, which I'll show you how to do as well. So let's go ahead and add some, we'll add some text here. You're on a 10-day streak. And we'll change that to, sorry, let's just double check what we had. Okay. And then this font was going to be like a green like that. Let's make this 10 and 10. And we're going to choose R for rectangle. If you want to create a square, just hold Shift and drag. You're going to create a square like that. I think these were a little bigger like that. So we might actually end up making this box a little bigger depending on what we need. All right, so this color, let's just copy this color because we're going to need it for these squares as well. Paste it in there. Let's give this guy a corner radius of 10, and let's put some text inside of it. So we've got 7.5, and this is going to be white. So let's do FFF because that's going to be white. And then I believe it was 14. So let's just put that in there. Let's drill in a little bit. It's going to make it a little easier. Actually, 14 seems kind of small, but I'm going to hit T for another piece of text. I'm just going to put hours. And see this? This is actually behind the square. If you wanted to rearrange elements, you just click and drag. So we'll drag it in front of this square here. Whoops. So let's put that here. Let's change that to regular and change this to 12 and change it to white as well. So let's put it right there, and let's make this guy a little bigger. I think it might have been 18. Okay, so actually I'm gonna select these two and center it, and I'm gonna change it to text align center as well. And then just line it up right in the middle there. And then I'm going to duplicate this by pressing Command D and drag it down here and change it to this color right here. So in case you can't click it and you can't see it, you can always select it from here. and hitting this will make it visible or invisible, this sort of eyeball here. All right, so let's change the font of this text so we can actually see it. And this would be like Jan 1st or something like that. And now let's group this in a single group because we're going to be duplicating that. So the 7.5, the Jan 1st, the hours, the rectangle, Command G to group it together into a day. So let's call this a day. And then we're going to press Command D and duplicate it and move it kind of like that. And let's press Command D, and it's actually going to be smart enough to put it beside it, right? And do it again, press Command D, do it again, right? This last one, I'm going to make it a dotted line because I don't think I can fit. Oh, I can fit another one. This is 9, whereas this is 10. That's close enough, but it looks a little cramped. So I'm going to press undo, and I'm going to position all of these days instead in the middle of this box. So it's 3340. Let's move it over like that. Okay, so for this particular square, the text, I want the text to be green, so I still have that green on my clipboard, so I'm going to change that to green, and I'm going to make this square white, but I got to give it a green dotted line, right? So fill, I told you, was the color that it's filled with. Stroke is the border color, so it doesn't have any stroke, but I'm going to add a stroke. So there, by default, we get that. It's black. Let's change it to the green. And you can say that you want the stroke or the border to be on the inside or sitting on the outside of the shape. So it's kind of hard to tell unless I maybe go in here. You can see the border is this blue line. You can see that this green line is inside the shape because I've set it to inside. This rectangle here, set to inside. If I change it to outside, you can see that now the green border sits outside of the shape, and then centered is straddling. Yeah, it's right in the middle. So sometimes that matters, sometimes that doesn't matter, depending on you know, how you position your shapes and stuff. Okay, now we want to change it to a dotted line, and this is the width of the line. Let me see if I can remember exactly where. Yeah, there it is. So we're gonna want dashes, and so you specify basically how long you want the dash and then how long you want the gap. So if you want like even dashes and even gaps, you'll do 4 and 4. If you want maybe like gaps where it's half the width of the dash, then you'll do 4 and 2. So you can play around with that, whatever kind of suits your fancy. So we have something like that now. So that's how you're going to do that. All right. And then now there's one more interesting technique to use with these guys here, and that's masking, which I'll show you, and we'll do that little thing. And there's also a blue circle here, which all it is the same blue circle here, but positioned a little differently. So I'm going to grab this ellipse, hit Command D to duplicate it. I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and then I'm going to kind of move it here. Maybe I can hit K to use my scale tool to scale it up a bit, and then I can use the rotate to just rotate that over there, right? Or I could just change the colors or anything like that. You can also move your mouse cursor to a corner, and you can also just do that. That might be a little easier to do. So there's that. All right, so now we're going to add these guys right here. All right, so let's go ahead and add a rectangle. So, you know, roughly the same width, like that, roughly the same height, and we are going to give it a corner radius so it looks like that. So how are we going to get the image into this this rounded rectangle? Well, you literally grab an image, download it from somewhere, and then drag it into your browser, into here. So where I got these images was pexels.com. So it's a site where you can kind of grab free stock photography. Some of them might not be free to use actually. Yeah, some of them say free to use, some of them you need attribution, so just double check, I'm not sure. But I've prepared a couple here. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and drag this image into the browser like that. So you can see it's really big. So I'm gonna zoom out. You can see how big this image is. I'm just going to scale it down a little bit, hit K on my keyboard and scale it down like that. Zoom back in, scale it down. But you can see that it doesn't really fit within my rounded rectangle, right, which is this here. So what you do is you use this technique called masking, and it exists in all sorts of graphic software, and it's done a little bit differently in each one. But in Figma, you highlight the two things you want, and what you're essentially doing is you're saying you want a cutout of, or imagine this shape as a window, right? You want to see this image through that rounded rectangle as a window. Okay, so you select both of them and you hit mask, right? And there you go, just like that. Sometimes you play around with the position. I kind of get this mixed up all the time, because if you have the image underneath, like if you have the rectangle on top and then you highlight both and you hit mask, you get a different result. So usually I try one way. If it doesn't work, I just reorder these two layers and then I try it again, and I usually get the order that I want. Okay, and then I just overlay text on top. So I had this. This is going to be white text. And where did my text go? Oh, I'm going to add another text element. I think I lost it. So let's write some text first. Let's highlight it, change it to white. I'm going to make this left aligned instead. And let's just double check what I used. So here I used the mixed font actually. So this top line was 36 and the bottom lines were 14, and you can actually use that. This was bold and this was medium. So I'm going to copy this. I'm just going to paste it in here. Oh, I copied the styles. I don't want to do that. So because I want to show you 20% off your order at Sephora. So I'm going to highlight the top part here. I'm going to choose medium. I'm going to choose, what was it? Was it 36? Okay, this was actually bold. 36 seemed a little big. Okay, so this bottom part, then you highlight that part and you can choose medium. So you can kind of alter it. As you can see, it's kind of hard to read. So let me just position it properly from 10 and 10. It's kind of hard to see, right? You can put a dimmed background. I think I have something slightly there. Yeah, so you see I have this shape, this vector that I created. That's a sort of like a dimmed background. So it fades from black to semi-black. This is semi-transparent. And I'm going to do the same technique here. So you can either draw your own vector. So you can use the pen tool and you can draw your own shape, or you can use a square or a polygon even. So let me just show you using a square here. And then you're basically going to mask it again. So we'll use a square like that, right? And we'll rotate it so that it covers everything that we want it to cover. And this is going to be, let's say, black. And then again, we are going to just put it inside there. And then we'll put the text above it. Sorry, like that. All right, so we've got, this is the mask. This is the rounded rectangle. This is the image. This is our sort of background for the text. And this is the actual text. And it's all inside this mask group. So nothing, you know, it's looking through this window, this rounded rectangle window. Nothing ever goes over that border. So for this this background, I'm going to change it from solid to linear. So now change the direction of that. We'll have the heaviest black on that side. We'll have the gradient on this side, so you can see, right? It makes the text a lot more legible. And then with this mask group, let's just change this to reward. You're able to add a drop shadow on the whole thing. So there's the drop shadow. Let's again configure it to 20 blur, 10 distance, and 15 opacity. So you get that slight, actually, are we seeing it? It looks a little bit invisible. So you can click this button and you can actually see it. It's just so slight, it's hard to tell. So what else have we got here? So we've got two more, same technique. So I'm not going to repeat. I'm not going to do it, but I'm just going to duplicate this reward and drag it here so that we can actually finish off this design. All right, I want to show you this circle here. So for an ellipse, just choose ellipse or O, and then go ahead and click and drag, holding shift so you get a perfect circle. You can do something like, make it a little bigger depending on what you want. And I'm going to hold down command and I'm going to choose the frame so I can make sure that the margins is 20 from the bottom and 20 from the right. And then I'm going to choose a color like something like that. And you can either see, here's the thing, you can either make the shape itself. Oh, sorry. This is the color. So what I want to explain is that you can have an opacity to the color. That's changing the alpha of the color, or you can change the alpha of the entire layer. This is the alpha of the layer, right? And sometimes you just want to have a slightly transparent color, and sometimes you want to have a slightly transparent layer. It might not immediately be obvious what you need right now, but a good example would be, let's say, this reward right here. It's a group of items, right? So if I highlight this group and I make it, 50% transparent, it's going to make everything inside of that group 50% transparent. It's going to make, all of the items 50% transparent. So that's the handy thing about modifying opacity at the layer level. All right, and I just realized that we should probably group these things some more so that it's a little more organized. So here are the days. There's the streak box. Here are the days. Is this one part of it? Yeah. So I'll group this all up and call this the streak. And this one was the stats. All right, so that's a little more organized. So this is my, these two are the background. So I'm going to group that. I'm going to call it the background. And this one is my menu. Well, this is the menu circle. So let's build up the menu circle with a couple more elements, and then we're going to group that together and call it the menu. So I'm going to make this semi-transparent, let's say 80%, and I'm going to put two rectangles for the plus. Now here would be a chance I could use an add icon. I can simply drag it on. But I couldn't find one that was exactly what I wanted, and so I decided to just create two rectangles. Oops, like that. Right, so this one's going to be a little tricky. So 48, 48, 15, 15. Oh, that's perfect. Okay, now I'm going to duplicate this and then just change the angle to 90%. Like that, and that gives me my plus. And you see how these are two separate rectangles here in my layers list? You can actually combine it into one object or one vector. If you hold these two and you use this button called union. Now there are a couple different ones. If you pull it down, you can subtract one vector from the other. So it's like taking one shape out of another. You can combine the two like I want to do here to create a single vector, which represents my plus symbol, and you could do intersect and exclude. So I'm going to choose union, and now I get my one vector, which is consisting of these two rectangles. So this is just, going to call this the add icon. And I'm going to group these two elements, Command G, into a menu button. Wow, that's a really big menu button. But luckily, because I grouped it together, I can just hit the group, hit K, and then I can just scale this guy down. So that's basically it. I hope that you learned some pretty interesting techniques in putting together this screen. Right? We ran out of time to do it in this video to put together a second screen, but I do want to continue to do these sorts of design videos where I demonstrate different techniques with using Figma or Sketch. Let me know in the comments below if you'd like to see like a Figma basics tutorial. And also let me know if you are an expert or you're a designer. Let me know if there's different things I can improve on, maybe different techniques I didn't know or I could have done better, different shortcut keys that I didn't use. Let me know because I want to learn and I'm not by any means an expert in Figma. All right, I hope this was helpful to you. So if you like this video and you want to see more, hit the thumbs up button on this video. Don't forget to support the channel by subscribing and hitting that bell notification icon so you get emailed when the next video is published. All right, so thanks for watching. I appreciate your time and I'll see you in the next lesson.